In the past 20 years or so, computer games have come to play an increasingly important role in the lives of young people around the world. Recent research has found that around 80% of adolescents and young adults in Hong Kong play various kinds of computer and video games on a regular basis. The popularity of these games has inevitably raised concerns about their effects on the physical and mental health of young people. And this is the theme of my presentation this morning. Now, I'm going to start by looking at some of the main positive effects of these games, and then I'll move on to examine some of the negative effects identified by researchers. Let's start with the positive impact. And I think here we can identify three potential benefits. Perhaps the most important positive effect that researchers have identified is in the area of spatial ability. This means a person's ability to remember the forms of objects and to understand how these objects match with other objects or spatial positions. In recent years, a number of studies, notably the one conducted by Leslie Chen in 2002, have shown that young people who play computer games tend to do well in tests of spatial ability. This is quite an important benefit because, as you are probably aware, most intelligence tests include a measure of spatial ability. The second potential benefit of playing computer games is that it enhances eye-hand coordination. As you know, many games, especially some of the recent action games, require split-second timing, and researchers have shown quite conclusively that these improve kids' eye-hand coordination. The study by Walsh, which is on the references list I've given you, is particularly interesting, and I do urge you to read it. The final potentially beneficial effect is still the subject of a lot of debate, and this is the question of creativity. Now, some teachers claim that computer games prevent young people from developing their creative and problem-solving skills, and this is because these games tend to follow a number of preset rules. However, advocates of computer games, including, of course, the companies that produce them, point out that many modern games give players a lot of opportunities to use their imagination, for example, by creating stories. Whether computer games really do foster creativity is a question that still requires detailed investigation. Having looked at some of the positive consequences, now I'd like to turn to the negative effects of playing computer games. And I think here we can classify these into two categories: physical and mental. Let's start with the physical effects. I'd like to mention 3 points here. One of the most interesting studies of the impact of computer games on the physical health of young people was carried out by Michael Brown a few years ago. Basically, what he found was that young people who spend considerable amount of time, hours on end, staring into a monitor risk impairing their sight, particularly when they watch these games in darkened rooms. Among the other medical problems highlighted in the literature are crooked posture, which is caused by kids being hunched over the computers for long periods of time, and pain in the hands, which happens when the same moves are repeated over and over again. When we consider the mental effects, one of the main problems associated with playing computer games is that they are highly addictive. Parents often find that when their children start playing games, they find it very difficult to stop. And this means that they tend to ignore or give less attention to key activities such as reading or homework. There are also concerns that their solitary absorption in computer games prevents them from interacting with family and friends. Obviously, one of the key issues to consider when examining the influence of computer games is that of violence. In fact, most psychologists would argue that violence is the biggest problem associated with computer games. Most computer games produced today have violence as their main theme, and despite the growing concerns of parents and teachers in the past decade, it would seem that violence in computer games is becoming increasingly explicit and realistic. We are thus faced with the familiar question: does playing violent computer games lead to aggressive behavior in young people? This is clearly a very complex issue, but on the evidence of research done in the past decade, it seems that young people who regularly play violent computer games tend to be more aggressive than those who do not. Okay, what I'd like to do now is